So, unfortunately, we've already gotten to a point where the sequences of the events of the game are going to become a little bit more scattered in terms of, well, it depends, I suppose, but especially here, I'm going to be talking about parts of the game that are in much different parts of the game, but otherwise, if I didn't talk about them like this, they would be in such completely different parts that it would be hard to keep the same idea of what I'm trying to talk about in this episode, the theme of this episode. So that's just how it's going to be for this one, and likely a good few others, but yeah, in this case, that's going to be the start of this one, where it kind of breaks apart the sequences of the game more so than the others so far. But the theme of this episode is going to be that basically talking about how it is curious that, or I really don't believe in coincidences anymore, but I don't think it is a coincidence at all that in the progression of Ness's adventure, or Ness's journey, whatever, is that the enemies that you encounter and the mini stories, if you want to say, the mini conflicts that you have to resolve are all involving not so much this alien force that has been talked about so much in the game so far, but more so the people in your immediate vicinity, the other human beings that you can interact with and that are in your, just the other human beings in the towns. This is what the main enemies that you're fighting for the most part are throughout so many parts of the game. I'd estimate probably, I could be wrong, but I would say about 40% at least of the game. 40% at least. Maybe more like 35% are other humans in that society in some way, like, themes in that society that are human beings. And not just the people that you're fighting in the actual combat scenarios, but just the main antagonist, I guess you could say, of the subplots throughout this journey is that they're humans in some way. They're humans, as far as you're concerned, the same as your character Ness is. And only until much later in the game, for the most part, like I said, it's not perfect here, but for the most part, until later parts of the game is when the majority of the enemies become much more esoteric in nature, alien, both literal and metaphorical, in nature, actually become the main bulk of the enemies you fight. But up to this point, the enemies are almost all humans in some way, either just animals, which I guess you could sort of count, but I don't really. It's just kind of like how it is in fantasy or RPG games, I guess. You're always fighting like dogs and stuff like that. They got cats or bats, bears, but the ones that I'm going to be talking about are the human ones that you're fighting, and why I think this has a lot of importance in the theme of Ness's journey, I guess you could say, the meaning of Ness's journey in some way that relates to ourselves. So basically, the first enemies that you're fighting when you first start the game, the first enemies that when you could start combat in the game are just basic animals, bats, well, not so much bats in this case, but dogs, ravens, snakes, very basic stuff like that. Even, bugs a little bit later. Bugs that have, PSI abilities or whatever, antoids, attack slugs, rats. Even before those, that you could even get into that part, you are fighting the local gang of Onett, which, in this case, they're They are titled the Sharks. Their leader is this guy named Frank. When you are fighting these basically just like local kid gang, the whole town is like in sort of some amount of disarray, because of this local gang causing trouble and stuff. So that's the first opponent that you go against, are these kids, ran by somebody who's not that much older than a kid, but he's like probably some kind of definitely much older than Ness, some adolescent kid named Frank. When you defeat him, you get access to the first location of your sanctuary location to fight that sanctuary guardian. But then after that, if you want to progress to the next town, you actually have to fight Onet's police force, weirdly enough. Like that's for whatever reason, the police chief has you fight 4 or 5 of his quote unquote best men, and then you fight him himself, and when you win, you are given access to Tucson. You are the barrier is taken down for Tucson, and you're allowed to progress through there. But I look at this whole Onet sequence as very interesting in that way, because it's like, first you're fighting local kids, or whatever, like your local gang, and then you're fighting the authority. You're fighting the authority of, most people would say, is one of the main hands of authority, especially in your local personal bubble or whatever, would be like the police force, that form of the government authority. And I look at this, hopefully it's getting a little bit clear. What I'm trying to say here is that you are going through I would say a similar thing that we had to go through. I guess you could say most people had to go through that are thinking about these things, or that have been going through this stuff. You're going through those steps in the same way, in a similar way, in Ness's journey here, his spiritual journey, I would say. He is breaking down the first things that you almost always have to go through doing this kind of spiritual journey, or a spiritual journey of ours. Like, at least for me, the first thing that I had to kind of get through was, for one, the fact that if you would try to talk about this stuff, because you were naive enough back then to think that you can, quote unquote, convince other people what you were seeing and be like, oh yeah, see what's going on here? This isn't right. And then you are quickly brought back to some amount of your own senses, like, oh, this isn't working, because they're just calling me a nut job or crazy, or just dismissing everything I say and saying, oh, that's not how this place works. What are you talking about? That's crazy. So first you have to break down that kind of social barrier, which I'd say would be your local acquaintances, I guess you could say, just your local people that you would normally interact with in some way, that you probably see on a daily basis to some regard, maybe, like, and in this case, it's just a gang of kids, and Ness could be the misfit of those kids in a way, that he's the one that sort of started to break away from that kind of idea, I guess, and had to push them back. Even so much longer after that, you probably realize, maybe even before that, but I would say after that, you kind of realize that the government bodies are even more a lie than what you've been told. Like, at least for me, like, I realized pretty early on, I think, that the police, they're really not there to help you per se. Like, maybe that's what some of them working there have the intentions deep down to do that, but in reality, they really don't. Like, you dig even just a little bit deeper and you're like, wow, every time that I've had an interaction with a police officer or something like that, it hasn't necessarily been negative always, but it hasn't helped the situation at all for me. Like, it hasn't really helped anybody. It's just kind of like they're just, just local minions. Like they don't really care about you. That's not what their modus operandi is to help you or make the local area better or whatever. They're there to serve the system that they are paid from, that they are paid by, that they are sustained from. That's what I would say that is happening with Ness as well, is because, in a very literal sense, he has to progress in his journey. He has to beat up the local police force. Like he has to beat the crap out of the local police force, and then he is allowed to continue on to the next part of his spiritual journey, I guess you could say, in a very literal sense. And as I said, I see this as very similar to most of us as well would have to experience this. Even more so when you go on to Tucson, you start fighting more local people. Depending on what sequence you go through, there's a few directions you could go to that lead to in the end the same end outcome, but you could do it in a slightly different sequence that doesn't really change much. Like in Tucson, at least for me, the first person I go and fight is this guy at this local thrift joint or whatever, local thrift shop place. And he's the I guess you could say the person who runs the place almost. And his name is Everdread, and for whatever reason, when you go near him, he's like, all right, let's fight, or something like that. Let's fight, and then you fight him. And then when you beat him into submission, he tells you to come. Basically, he tells you what happened to Paula in some degree, that she was kidnapped, and basically when and if you find her, save her, whatever, come to him, and he'll give you something. A few people, I think in Onett, there's one kid in one of the houses that says something about his family going to worship, or to join the happyism, religion or cult or whatever. That's obviously foreshadowing, but interesting nonetheless. And then you even see that in Tucson as well, even more so. You have a few more people talking about this happyism cult wherever they are in the town over, and people are acting strange. The people are acting strange going to this religion, to this cult. They, literally called a cult. It's not subtle in that sense. And in Tucson, you're just fighting. In Tucson itself, you're still fighting just weird people and to continue on to this place that you're being told about, this happy village, you have to talk to this one of these two inventors, but the one you have to help is the one that is the least assuming, Apple Kid, which I'll talk about a little bit more way later on, because I think that's interesting, his name and his theme, Apple Kid. And then you continue on through this area that is a pretty difficult area, especially when you're by yourself as Ness. And here it kind of messes up a little bit, because you start fighting more alien things even now. You start fighting animated plants and stuff like that. Some of these other things, you start fighting, I guess you could say, direct minions of Gygas, which would be just weird things. But when you're done with this area, then you go back to where I was kind of talking about, where you get into this happy village, and everything is blue. Like that's the whole theme of it, is everything. This whole cult is about everything being blue, and how happy they all are. And every single person in the town at this time, when you first get there, is talking about the religion and how, just basically like anything you would expect to hear from one of these generic cults you've ever heard of. But it's all what you'd kind of expect from I guess, I don't know, like, Jehovah's Witnesses, these Christians that are like especially pushy with their stuff, just like almost any of these religions you see preaching all the time, like this is what the village is. And you'd say like, oh yeah, well, it's a cult, so that's of course that's what's going on. But I see this in the theme of what I'm trying to get here is like, now the next institution that you are trying to break down, not so much break down, I mean, in Ness's case, he's literally breaking it down, like he is here to stop this cult, sort of. Like his main goal is to find Paula and save her, but the reason she was kidnapped is because of this cult, and the only way to save her from her imprisonment here is to get the key from the leader of this cult. But what I'm trying to get at is that the institution that Ness is literally breaking down is basically an organized religion, or just organized religion in some way. Like, and it's a pretty generic sort of religion. Like, it's not specific in what it's trying to parody or whatever. Here is that it could just be like anyone. I would say anyone, especially that tries to talk, like, preach to people like you need to be this, or you are a sinner, or you are a devil, or you are against us, that kind of thing, which many of them seem to be the more popular ones to a degree. But here is the religion he's trying to break down is happyism, the blue cult, whatever. But I would say that in this regards, for ourselves, this is the same thing that we kind of have to go through, is after we've broken down so many parts of our lives, we also start having to question our own beliefs, which to some people, one of the things that they had to start questioning was their own beliefs, if they had believed in a religion before they started questioning things more. And just the organized religions in themselves, like having to question them, and depending on how you look at things, like just throw them away altogether, or just realize that so many of them are lying, or have lied to you, or have been deceiving you in some way, have been putting you on the wrong path. And that's just how I see this. And it's interesting that with the happy cult here, is that their leader his name is Mr. Carpenter, like car painter. And I would see that as, someone would dismiss that as, oh, it's just, just a joke. It's a joke, a play on words, is that, they're painting everything blue. This guy's name is Carpenter. He paints cars. Paints them blue. And he carries a paintbrush to paint everything blue. And I'm like, nah, I don't see that. Because why would he be named Carpenter or Carpenter? That's like the full word, Carpenter. And I just see that as literally what was in the Bible. I'm not very well read in the Bible. I haven't been to Sunday school in a while, but that was always the theme with Jesus. With Jesus Christ he was, before he started going on his pilgrimages and everything, started helping people, his profession was being a carpenter. And as far as I remember, that's not something that's like hidden or whatever, is that he was a person who worked on furniture or whatever, just like the pretty generic title carpenter. And this guy, who is this leader of this religious cult, his name is Mr. Carpenter. So to me, that is absolutely no coincidence, just saying basically, hey, this is in some way Christianity here. Like this is talking about Christianity. And you could look at it as anything, I would say, just any generic religion, because they almost always work the same anyway in this regard. But just especially obvious there, like, hey, this is a cult or whatever. This is a religious cult. Christianity is like that. I've seen that with so many people that comment. Whenever they comment, the only people I see commenting in other videos and stuff about this, I don't see. I really don't see Muslims. I really don't see Jews, Jewish people. I really don't see, as far as I can tell, I really don't see Buddhist. I really don't see whatever other religion, Aztecs. I really don't see other religions commenting and preaching how much they preach, saying like, you are on the wrong path, you need to believe in our God, that you need to believe in Jesus Christ and all this stuff. And Christianity is the most, in this regard, I see it as the most prevalent, like even more so than the people that be coming to your door and saying, hey, you want to join our religion and all that stuff? Like, Christianity by far is the most preachy in that regard, and it's so obvious. But yeah, that's how I see this part especially. And when you beat Mr. Carpenter, you find out that supposedly the reason that he was doing this after you beat him was he was being influenced in some way after he got this golden statue called the Mani Mani statue. And this is a very important thing that I'm going to talk about later on, but overall this is apparently the thing that is, I guess you could say, supposedly corrupting the people to do the evil things that they started doing before Ness started his journey or whatever. When Gygas's influence started to spread, was through these Mani Mani statues to the main minions, and then the main minions spreading it through to the people, the quote unquote the lesser people. But after this very important part, I guess you could say, is in this video, in that regard, the religious cult that you break down, you save Paula, and then you get help to go to Threed, the next town over, after you save Paula. And, before this, all the religious people, they've pretty much said, all right, we've renounced what we were saying before. Sorry for everything, all the trouble we caused and all that stuff. After you defeat Mr. Carpenter. But then you with your new ally, Paula, well, you don't necessarily have to do this, but I figure what most people do is they go to their next My Sanctuary location, which is in a cave in the Happy Village. And this, the name of this location is Lilliput Steps. I think I'm gonna make a separate video about these ones, because the symbolism for the sanctuary locations is, some of them it's a lot harder to interpret, and some of them I still don't really know if there is anything to interpret. I don't know. But this one I think is a little bit interesting, so I'm going to talk about that in another video separately, even though it kind of breaks the sequence I've been trying to keep, but what are you going to do? Now you have Paula, the game becomes much, much easier from what it has been up to this point, because now you have an extra party member who knows how to use magic, PSI, whatever, offensive PSI. Very useful to have another party member in a game, any RPG like this, JRPG. But then you go back to Tucson, her town, and to progress, you get these guys, you get given money from Everdred after saving Paula. He gives you a big wad of money, and you use this money to get these guys, the Runaway Five, out of their debt obligation in the local theater. And when you do that, a little show plays, it's just whatever. It's interesting. One of the guys mentioned something about money, which I'll talk about some other time maybe. But then you take the bus that you take their bus down to Threed, and in Threed, the whole town has been overrun by zombies, like the undead, and it's all like spooky themed. And this one's a little bit harder for me to kind of say, like, it's literal zombies, like, you know, the Walking Dead, like rotting dead and everything that you're encountering. And it's kind of weird because they're like semi-sentient sort of zombies. But I think that it actually kind of helps the point even more. Like, you're still fighting society, because even though there's zombies and like weird stuff like the undead, as we know, zombies are such a huge prevalent theme in all media and all culture or whatever. So much so that there is absolutely no way that it would be like naturally kind of like that. I feel it's been pushed, and as we almost call other people and that we would consider like NPCs or whatever, zombies, like we just call them zombies and stuff. I would say that this is very similar to the theme of, this is still almost on the theme of fighting society. Like Ness is fighting society. That being the zombies, I guess. Like, it's not a perfect sequence, but it kind of just makes me think of that. Like, in every way, this makes me think of that. And a lot of stuff happens at this point that I didn't really have much that I can interpret. Like, I can interpret more later probably, but at this point it becomes a lot more confusing to keep it kind of sequential, even worse. So you get Ness and Paula get knocked unconscious, and they become kidnapped pretty much, and the only way that they're able to get out is for Paula to telepathically speak to the next party member that you're gonna get, Jeff, this brilliant kid in the country over, Winters. And then you go through his entire section where he does his whole thing, his little story, his small part of his story, beginning of his story arc, whatever. You meet his dad, who's a inventor, brilliant inventor, whatever. And after all that, you get a saucer or whatever, a space, like a flying saucer, and you use this to. Jeff uses this to go to Threed and then basically break Ness and Paula out, and then he joins your party, and now you have 3 party members. Much better than even 2. He can't use PSI, interestingly, but he uses like gadgets and stuff. But after this point, let's see. After this point, you go through and you defeat the guy who is, I guess you could say, reanimating the zombies or causing the zombies to somehow come back from the dead, whatever. Master Belch. And maybe synchronicity here. The way that you beat him is to use this item on him called Fly Honey, and it's, the honey of flies, whatever that is. Supposedly, flies can make honey in this game. Just on the synchronicity of bees, because bees are really the only thing that you ever hear about making honey. But anyway, you beat him, and then the zombies go back to their graves, whatever. They stop coming around, so you basically save Threed. But the town, the place that you go after this is called Saturn Valley, I believe. And this is where you'd find your next My Sanctuary location. Oh, you do go to Saturn Valley first, and then you're told basically how to access Master Belch's underground base or whatever. And then after you beat him, but then you can go back to Saturn Valley and you can find your next My Sanctuary location, which is like Milky Well. But once again, I'll try and talk about the symbolism some other time for these ones specifically. Man, the chronology here is getting so messy, but what are you gonna do? But after that, you go back to Threed, you find that it's been saved, and, you know, you find that you saved it and everything, everybody's happy, the zombies are gone. The town's gloominess goes away after the zombies have been defeated, you know, the societal zombies, you defeat those. But then, the next part of the game, you go to the desert. I forget the desert's name. Doesn't really matter. But this is the desert. This desert is between Threed and the next town over, Fourside. There's a lot of stuff that does happen in this part as well. But for this video specifically, for this video's theme specifically, I'm going to skip over to say, alright, so we've gotten to Fourside, and your next adversary, once again, is a human one. You know, it's, as far as you're concerned, it's a human one. And this one is basically of this town at least, this big bustling town, that's like New York City, basically, is essentially New York City in that sense, is the political figure of this town, the mayor, who has, at this point, has all the police and all the other government bodies under his finger. He's completely corrupt and all this stuff. And obviously he's been influenced by this, once again, the Manny statue, but we'll talk about that another time. The way that you progress through this part is not so much defeating him himself, but you defeat what was causing his corruption, you basically thwart the political leader that is being influenced by this quote-unquote greater alien entity to do these things. Once again, I look at that as just as the theme of fighting society, is that you're going against the bodies that have been built, the societal institutions that have been built around us and have been taught throughout our lives. And that is the thing that you are fighting against in this part as well, is that being a political, you are trying to thwart this, literally in the game. And when you get past that, when you get past this point in Fourside, a lot of other weird stuff happens in this time as well, but once again, I'll talk about those things separately. After that point, that's when the enemies start becoming much more alien, for the most part. Alien, not human, esoteric, much different symbolisms can be gotten from some of them, but before this point, almost so many of the enemies you're fighting are either animals, which I don't really consider, they're just like that, you know, just generic kind of enemy sort of thing, but mostly humans, or parts of society. But yeah, that's basically what I'm trying to say, that Ness goes throughout a good portion of his journey just breaking down these institutions to some degree throughout his journey, his spiritual journey. That being stuff like his local minions, like the kids gang and all that stuff, like people just doing stuff that goes against what they would normally do kind of thing. The police institutions, or whatever you want to say, the government institutions like the police. A big one, the religious institutions, the organized religion, getting through that. And then even more so, just like the general bigger government, like the federal government sort of thing, like the political figures. And then even the other one with the zombies, like the general zombies, or whatever you'd say, of the zombie populace, of minions or whatever, just the people you'd see in your town. Oh yeah, I'll mention this synchronicity, probably, yeah, I'll just mention it now, instead of putting it in some kind of separate video or something. Since I've made the point already, what I was trying to say is that while you're in the Happy Village fighting the Happy cult, one of the people that you fight, one of that happy religious cultist, they say something really weird just from with context to what we're going through now, I guess you could say, is that a strange, unmasked person don't go to heaven and then they fight you or something like that. Like, strange, unmasked person don't go to heaven. And that's just how I see these general minions nowadays would be legitimately saying stuff like that. Like, if you're not wearing your mask, you're going to hell. You're not going to heaven, or you're a sinner or whatever. Even though they don't believe that because they're the different kind of religion in that sense. But that was just an interesting, I guess you could say, synchronicity is unmasked people being seen as sinners and heathens and stuff. But yeah, apologize for the really long and rambly video, but I was trying to get my point across here. Hopefully I can edit this down to make it a lot more concise and make more sense. But yeah, once again, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.